Well, good morning, everybody. It's Half Past Ridiculous, and we're seeking a sentimentum. Last week, we skimmed over a whole bunch of stuff. One of the crazy things about this, doing a show like this, is staying on topic on the concepts that we're looking at, and it's so difficult because they're all tied together. None of this can be looked at in a vacuum. You have to look at it as a piece of the whole, and everything relates to everything else, and it can get really, really complicated. We're trying to simplify as best as we can, but there's only so much we can do. Today, I think we're going to be looking at how the control system actually gets its control. What to look out for so that you don't get drawn in. We'll put it that way. And as mentioned in the pre-show, the easiest way, I get people asking me, what's the easiest way? What's the best way? How do I get out of this? The best way to get out of it is not get in it in the first place. The only way to do that is to recognize it when it raises its head. And Carl's got a lot of experience with this. He's actually got some practical experience behind this. I'm sure some of the other listeners have too. So, Carl, you want to come on out and let us know what you've been doing and how you dealt with it?
The list is long and distinguished. Good morning, everybody. Hello, John. If you want to go back, I was a police officer back in the UK for a number of years. And so I was indoctrinated into the law system. And fortunately, I wasn't completely taken in. I wasn't completely programmed. But looking back on those years, I now understand the process of what was going on in relation to the law that I was taught and the procedures that I was told to process. The procedures that were set out for me to follow so that the laws that I was enforcing or upholding, depending on the perspective, basically how the elements of those crimes were proven.
Do you recognize now, with your expanded understanding or expanded comprehension of this, how those procedures are designed to trap people?
Oh yeah, no, I understand it, much more now than I ever did then. I mean, I had a kind of an inkling that something wasn't right even then, because my service was fractioned, and I basically had a lot of nose-to-nose discussions, let's say, with some of my peers who I would politely describe some of them as just knuckle draggers. It was unfortunate. I mean, there were also some excellent people, men and women, that I was glad to call my friends. Unfortunately, they left the service before I did because they couldn't stand it either. But yeah, the realization of what was required under the law, the elements to fulfill the criteria of the crime, and then the evidence you then had to present. At the time, you had to present to the Crown Prosecution Service. So there was a whole set of procedures and sequences that you had to go through. And at the end, if everything went according to plan, which it typically did, you had your evidence, and you were then able to present that to the court. And obviously, what was nearly always the case, the defendant was found guilty. Not very often that there was a not guilty at the end of it all. But literally the process started, let's say, with me identifying what I believed that a crime had been committed. Now, in the case of the the majority of a police officer service, you're going to be on the street and you're going to end up with vehicle crimes, Highway Traffic Act. I'm saying crimes because that's what they refer to it, but we know differently. But you identify what you believe a crime has been committed. The next step is that you then have the authority or the power to then stop the driver of that vehicle, because until that point, you don't actually have the power to stop them. You can only stop them, or could, when I was a police officer, if you could establish that they were actually committing an offence. So you would stop the vehicle, you would approach them. When I was going through my particular training, the first question was, do you know why I stopped you? And the first typical answer, depending on how honest they were, yeah, I went through that red light, or yeah, I didn't really stop at that stop sign, or yeah, I was speeding, sorry. Okay, case proven at that point. You've actually admitted that you did wrong and you identified what it was that you did wrong. Next step, okay, what's your name? What's your date of birth? What's your address? Can I have your driving license? And typically we'd ask for the insurance and the registration for the vehicle as well. And at that point, we'd be looking at more offences.
I don't want to break your train of thought, but around here in Canada, as you're probably aware, at least in my experience, most of the time I was ever pulled over by the police, it was, this is just a routine check. And at the time, I didn't realize that was entirely bullshit. They are fishing. They're looking for something to pin paper on you with. And did you ever wind up with situations like that, Carl?
In the UK it was kind of difficult because we always had to establish the cause that we'd stop them. Even if it was, the basic one was, you were weaving between the lines. So we assumed that maybe you've under the influence of the drink or even drugs, because you couldn't drive in a straight line. We had to offer a reason. Now, if we managed to stop somebody under that pretense, we typically use that on them. And if they would be either indignant or we found out they actually had been drinking. But I don't know in Canada, to be honest, I haven't checked recently whether they have the power, because you are driving, in quotes, a vehicle, in quotes, on the road, in quotes, whether they have the right to just stop you arbitrarily.
Well, whether they have the right or not, they do. Pretty much everybody, I'm pretty sure all of our listeners have had at least one instance where this is just a routine check, which is, again, entirely bullshit. It is, yeah, I agree. In the, where is it? I can't remember where it is. I think it's in the Motor Vehicle Act. It basically pretty much unequivocally states that it is entirely unlawful. Jenny, can I have you mute your mic, please? Jenny? Oh, noise is gone. Thank you. It pretty much unequivocally states that it is entirely unlawful, and they use the word unlawful, to stop someone on the highways for the purpose of business. And that's exactly what the cop is doing when he stops you for a routine check. He's there to contract to do business with you. And so, we can talk all we want about the rules and how to use the rules so that you can gain some control in these affairs. But if the folks you're working with you're dealing with don't follow their own rules, what's the point even following rules? So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, the police officers, the training that they receive, it's basically an us and them concept. And they are now made to believe, I think, that they are more of an ultimate authority, that they can do and say pretty much what they want. Whereas when I started, it was already happening at the time, but there was a slow, which turned into a quick changeover from the old serve and protect concepts of policing, where you would, the prevention and detection of crime and the investigation of such was your foremost duty. Since then, it's not. It's become revenue generation in whatever way that they can. So stopping people on the street, because people don't know that they can challenge a police officer. Well, why the hell did you stop me? I haven't done anything wrong.
well, we do not advocate challenging the police because they have guns.
No.
They've been trained to kill, and they will do so. We've seen it over and over and over again.
And that's why people don't challenge them.
The safest route, if you're going to go that route, the safest route is I don't answer questions. And don't answer any questions. That puts the onus on them to establish that something has happened, that there's something that they can act upon. If you open your mouth, they will find something to use against you. And they do every single time. That's why they want to talk to you, is because you will incriminate yourself and give them the reason to pin paper on you.
Yeah, and the whole process that we want to go through is, help people understand the process that's taking place, and as John's just pointed out, how you can, let's say, deflect that process a little bit, so that you can defend yourself from these policy enforcement officers who are just seeking money from you.
Yep.
And they don't necessarily understand that that's what's happening, but it is, in fact, what's happening.
Yep. Again, we need to stress this every single show. We're not teaching people how to get out of anything. We're teaching people how to ensure that the correct action is taken. Now, if you do harm, if you do cause loss, if you do cause damage, most certainly you're going to deal with it, and you should be dealing with it. You must deal with it. But if you're minding your own business, if you're exercising your inalienable right, and they try to convert that to a crime, this is what we're working with, and what we're teaching people to deal with. Many, many, many times, a right is converted to a crime, and people don't even realize it. And you have to be able to see it before immediately when it first comes up. I mean, Carl's got a story about exactly that, and it has nothing to do with traffic. This is something completely different, but it's exactly the same thinking. You got to, the very first contact whether it's a lawyer, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a city worker, by law enforcement, it doesn't matter. The very first contact is critical in this, and that is where they're going to obtain what they believe is jurisdiction to do what they feel they need to do.
Yeah, and that was the procedures that I was referring to. There's a set procedure that pretty much every lawyer, every police officer, every authority takes to establish their jurisdiction over you, which then leads them on to step 2 and step 3 and so on. So going back to the police officer on the street, the next steps, once they've obtained the driver's license and the insurance and the registration, which actually during my period of service, people weren't required to have them with them. It was recommended that you did, but it wasn't required. because then you were given what was termed as a 7-day producer. So you were given a ticket that would then require you to produce that documentation at a local police station within 7 days. And if you failed to do that, then you were then guilty of some further offences, which then typically required summons and appearances at magistrates' courts and the like. But if you had already committed a ticketable offence, then we could issue a fixed penalty notice or a fixed penalty ticket right at that point. The proof was usually written on the back of the tickets. It was our evidence. If you'd already admitted to it, sorry, go on, John.
Which you wouldn't get if you got the copy of the ticket, right?
No, exactly not. It was never given to you. But the notes were very briefly, summarily written on the back. And actually at a later stage, what we used to happen in the first part, we would issue the ticket, but we would then have to attach a full statement to go with that ticket. Nowadays, that doesn't really happen. You write stuff on the back of the ticket in the briefest of forms to indicate, spotted the vehicle, doing whatever, stopped, established the driver, he admitted, he said in quotes and blah, blah. And then you submitted the ticket like that. But you will never get a copy of that. Again, as something that I found out myself while I was in Canada, because I, under the rules of disclosure, I requested what the prosecution had and to disclose all that information. Now, all they did, and I know because I'd written something on the front of my ticket when I sent it in, they sent me back a copy of the ticket that was given to me originally and that I'd sent in, going not guilty, but pleading not guilty at the time. And I got a copy of that one back. So they didn't supply me with what I'd requested, which was the front and back of the original officer's ticket. So they actually hadn't complied with the rules of disclosure. And they never will, because that particular ticket, I think that's part of the charging instrument, which you will never get, and you'll never get a copy of it either.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the process of many years of actually doing this, and then the last 10 years of me being actively engaged in this particular process, what I found out is the procedures and the set processes that I was trained to go through as a police officer is what they do to firstly confirm that there has been a crime committed, and I'll use crime as just a catch-all phrase. Secondly, who is responsible for that, and then establish the identity of the person, which is correct as well, person. And then whether they admit right at the scene. And if they do, then that's part of the evidence against them, because typically they opened their mouth and said something that they probably shouldn't have done.
Yeah, that's just a little humor aside. Every time you speak about these procedures, I keep having that Johnny Winter song come up, the Boogie Woogie. I was traveling eastward down Whitehall Street when I heard a sort of a boogie woogie music. I don't know why. I just, every time you describe this, that comes up and it just sticks in my head. Now, the initial contact with the police, it's pretty obvious. Do you know why I pulled you over? If you answer the question, then you're sunk. You're admitting to it. they will go through several iterations of that, basically that same question. Do you know how fast you were going? Are you aware of such and such? And they will ask you a series of questions that at first glance simply seem innocuous, but if you really listen, if you really look at the questions, they're looking to make their jobs easier and to pin you with something, or to cause you to pin yourself with something, because they don't want to do the work.
Well, typically, most people, in my experience, hung themselves because they will admit they knew what they were being stopped for, although that there were some wonder boys, that we would stop frequently, who would just say no idea and be really offhand.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would like to do in a number of these situations is do you know why I stopped you? Well, you're fishing and you have a quota to fill. But that's argumentative, and although it might be fun to do, it's probably going to get you smacked. So I don't,
you're not going to get off with anything.
No, you're not going to get away with that, because these people, these guys with the guns, they don't suffer fools, and even something as simple as I don't answer questions can get you in a lot of problems. In a lot of cases, as we've seen posted on the internet and YouTube, there's hundreds of these videos. It ends at that moment. It stops. Okay, go, get out of here. So if you're going to derail the process, do so in a way that's not going to escalate conflict. That's the best advice I can give, the best suggestion I can make as far as this goes. Now, whether it escalates or not is not entirely up to you. I mean, in many cases, you can de-escalate it if it gets up. You say, look, I understand what you're doing. I know what you're doing. I am not subject to this stuff, and I'm not going to incriminate myself. And usually, depending upon where you're at, I mean, like the southern states, Texas probably wouldn't work very well. Someplace like Maine or some rural area in Canada, it would probably work just fine, because those people, they don't have the incredible amount of conflict and the incredible amount of perceived danger that the inner city, where people walk around with guns all the time, where the very violent, the very dangerous section that those folks have to deal with reside. So tailor your responses, tailor your plan to the area you're in. And, some places, like where Vivek is in Singapore, you piss these people off, you're gone. They'll just take you out. They don't care. Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, even in China, you don't play these games, because you will not win. Those guys, they just, they have absolute autonomy, and they can just do basically whatever they feel like doing. And if you piss them off, you're toast. North America, Europe, probably most places in Africa, it's a little easier to do. It's not such a big thing, because there's more people watching. And if you can get an audience, you're even better, because then that really limits what they can do, because they can't just do whatever they want if there's 30 people watching them, and especially if they're filming. Initial contact with the police, it's pretty obvious. Once you understand, once you see how they use these little mind games, these little trick words to get you to incriminate yourself, get you to tie yourself up. Lawyers are a little bit different. Now, with a lawyer, typically it's the first letter they send you. And if you respond, then they got you. You are now in contract. You are now you are have some obligation to continue the process. So really look at the very, very first interaction with all of these people. Think about different scenarios. I do that all the time. I will think about, what would I do if this happened? If they did this, if they did this, if they did this, and run through a number of little scenarios in your head. Chances are you're not going to have them right because you don't know what's going on, and it's chess at 80 miles an hour anyway. But it's using that kind of a thought process, and it's actually sort of role playing, prepares you so that when it does jump out at you, it's not totally out of the blue. Like some of the questions you may not have thought about, but at least you've thought about the process and what's going on in the process, and you would be at least somewhat prepared to deal with what's coming. And again, I can't stress it enough. If you actually did cause harm, loss, or damage, deal with it. Don't try to get out of it. Fix it. And fix it with the person that you harmed. Do it your own self. Don't make it necessary so that the so-called authorities have to force you to fix it, because then we're not solving any problems. The idea here is to make it so that courts and law enforcement and all of that are unnecessary. They no longer have a purpose because the people will do it for themselves. They will deal with it themselves. They will seek to resolve conflict rather than escalate conflict. And it's because most people seek to escalate conflict. I know it sounds, it sounds a little harsh. A lot of people are not going to like that, but that's fine. Look at your situation very, very carefully. If somebody beaks you off in the bar, do you de-escalate or do you defend yourself? If someone cuts you off on the highway or drives aggressively and causes you some issues, do you get upset about it, right? Honestly look at how you deal with these situations. Are you seeking to escalate the conflict? I mean, road rage, it's everywhere. And it's huge. It's part of the programming. Recognize that. You're being taught to live in conflict because it serves the controllers. They want that. They want, the more conflict they can generate between the populace, the more control they can grab. We see this in some of the ridiculous stuff they do in the States all the time. So, Carl, I'm going to have to leave it to you. Ruff's having a problem. I got to go fix it.
Okay, for sure. Okay, going back to the police officer situation. There's a few times if you're going to get stopped by a police officer, you either going to sit there in the seat with your window down, scared to death, or going to be fairly confident and okay, what the hell is this all about? John may or may not agree. You can initiate a conversation with him first, because at that point it should, because of the way that you are talking, it should indicate your mindset, your demeanor at the time. So, you could stick your head out the window with your hands preferably in plain view somewhere, especially in the States and places where police have guns, and you could just, hey, how are you doing today?
Well, there's one thing that came up years ago. Now, I don't know how well this works, but it does set the tone, and that is you speak first, and for the purpose of giving that individual his mandate. Now, in Canada, for sure, the police have two hats. They have a peace officer hat and they have the policy enforcement hat. So give them the mandate. Good afternoon, peace officer. What can I do for you? Which all immediately sets him He has to actually change hats to become a policy enforcement officer at that point. He has to get you to recognize he's police, not a peace officer. But he is a peace officer first. And the peace officer deals with common law. Nothing, that's simple as that. There was a story, there was a young fella in Alberta who got stopped on the side of the road, and the police officer came up, asked him a question, and he came up to him. He gave her the mandate. Good afternoon, peace officer. What can I do for you? And he stayed in common law. Everything she brought up, he goes, well, how does that relate to common law? How is that a breach of the peace? And would not step off recognizing that officer as a peace officer, regardless of what she did. And after about 2 minutes, he just said, okay, thank you very much, drove away, and she was standing there on the highway wondering what happened. This is one, it doesn't always work this way. And I have to stress this as well. Every single situation is going to be different. But we have had enough people do this that we know there are a number of these processes that you can go through that do derail their procedures. And I was looking for it this morning. I wanted to find it. There was a document I read last night that had court rulings, actual written statements by judges stating specifically that statute is not law. It's policy. It's corporate policy, in fact. And so if they bring up, well, you broke the law. Well, what law? Well, Section 4228 of the Motor Vehicle Code. Well, that's not law. That's statute. And one of the statements that we use a lot, World Freeman Society uses a lot, is, are you aware that failure to distinguish between statute and law is gross negligence? Because it is. They have an obligation to distinguish between statute and law. But if you don't enforce it yourself, it'll never happen. They'll do whatever they want. And this is,
because you don't distinguish that there is a difference. And they won't tell you.
That's right.
Most of them, they don't know anyway.
That's right. And, that's why I said in the introduction video that I created, what you don't know will hurt you. And because if you don't understand this stuff, if you don't realize you need to make the distinction, and then they are in a position to prove there is no distinction, which they can't do, it changes the game completely. And depending upon how you do it is going to determine whether they take you to the gravel pit and beat you senseless, or they say thank you very much and walk away. And this comes into the conflict aspect of this. If you seek to de-escalate conflict and educate in a peaceful and pleasant manner, in a manner that you would appreciate someone doing to you, the chances of having significant issues are going to be dramatically less.
Yeah, and I think the process with the police officer, you really have to take this one on an exactly a case-by-case basis. And as you pointed out, you can introduce yourself to the officer as he's approaching. And even if you just say, good morning, officer, it's a beautiful day. What can I do for you?
Yep. To introduce yourself,
of course.
To introduce yourself, if they, what's your name? Well, I'm commonly known as. Okay. Very important. If you just say I'm John, or give the what you believe is your full name, they will assume that you're speaking of the fiction. Okay. These are some of the assumptions that happen. You have to destroy these assumptions first. And rather than, I'd like to actually bring up the assumption. Are you looking for a legal name or a lawful name? Legal name. Well, I don't have a legal name. That's my way of doing things. I mean, everybody's going to have their own way of doing things. But in general, whenever they ask for a name, I am commonly known as, because that puts you in common law jurisdiction. It eliminates the assumption that you are speaking of the fiction. If they ask, "Are you John?" Well, are you looking for the fact or the flesh or the fiction? Which one are you looking for, right? Destroy their assumptions right off the bat. And you know, on the very initial contact, you can set the tone whether or not, or you can basically get the ball rolling whether or not you have a chance to get out of this in one piece, or you are going to wind up paying a lot of money. And it's all in the very first time you open your mouth is what's going to determine that, pretty much.
Yeah, and the other ways of doing it, of course, as you mentioned, state, good morning, good afternoon, peace officer. Or you could, as I've just mentioned, good morning, good afternoon, what a beautiful day, what can I do for you? And by the way, are you acting in your capacity as a peace officer or as a policy enforcement officer? Be out and about, abrupt, and say it.
Yep, and
the next step.
If they come up and say, I'm a police officer. I mean, Michael did this. My friend in Chilliwack did this, and he looks at this cop and says, "Are you here as a peace officer or a police officer? What's your role?" And she stuck her chest out and put her hands on her hips, and he goes, "I arrest people." I mean, attitude, big time attitude. Mike knew at that moment he's going to have issues. And you can tell right from as soon as you get a response, you can tell pretty much whether you're going to have, this is going to be a difficult process or it's going to be an easy process.
Yeah. And I think in that particular circumstance, then the tack that you take is going to be completely different.
Oh, yeah.
So instead of being a little bit rambunctious, maybe you'd switch off at that point. Might make things worse, might make things better. But you, as we've said before, at this point, okay, you've established your role. Now I'm not going to say anything. You're saying this to yourself. So the next step is they're going to start asking you questions or demand certain things from you.
Yep.
Hopefully they'll ask you a question, because at that point you'll say, "Sorry, I don't answer questions."
Yeah. In that specific instance, as soon as Mike heard that, if I remember the story correctly, Mike, if you hear this, let me know. You got my Skype. If I screw this up, I'm sorry. But if I remember correctly, in that instance, this was the time when Mike stepped back and clearly stated that this is a common law jurisdiction, and she would not enter his house. She would not cross the threshold of that house, because she knew at that point that she screwed up and had no authority there whatsoever. I mean, it's a very complex thing when you first get into it. I know I've said this a number of times already, and I can't stress it enough. It can be very, very complex and very difficult when you first get started. But once you get it, once you can see it, it becomes really easy to do. And you can see what steps you need to take pretty much in every interaction. I mean, I've been doing this for a long, long time, and even I get surprised. So, it's always going to be different. Every single situation is going to be different. Now, when you're dealing with a lawyer, it's pretty much always the same, because they've got one single set of procedures. You take them off those procedures and they fall apart. A judge, he's got one single set of procedures. There's 3 or 4 things you can do in court that if you do them correctly and you stick to your guns, destroys the court. But when you're dealing with police on the street, there's millions of ways it can go.
Yeah.
And most of them are not very pleasant.
They're all over the internet on YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's some good ones and there's some bad ones. And I think the bad ones tend to stay on YouTube because, of course, they want to instill that fear in everybody that you try this shit and this is what happens to you.
Yep.
But typically you'll find that the bad ones, the people who were responsible for those videos really didn't do it right. So they kind of got themselves in trouble. Yeah,
they weren't looking. Most of those, you can see it in the videos. They get belligerent. They get argumentative. They escalate conflict, And Rob Menard brought it out very, very, very succinctly when he said that the police officers, the policy enforcement officers, have 2 meters. They have a dignity meter and they have a safety meter. And if either one of those meters gets into the yellow, you're toast. Because that's just the way it is. You treat them like real people, treat them like regular human beings, just like you are. Treat them with the same respect you would expect, regardless of how they're treating you.
Yeah, and which was why I suggested that you initiate a contact with the police officer as they approach the vehicle. Be nice, and say to them, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever, officer. What a beautiful day. What can I do for you? It's a question. How he responds to that kind of leads you on the tack that you go next. If he's all officious and, driving license and registration, okay, what do you do next? You didn't get a response, you just got a demand. Well, the response to that was, and again, depending on what you feel from this particular police officer, you could say, must I present such a thing to you?
Rob brought this up. It's in one of his videos. I don't remember which one, but he's got lots of them in there. If you look on his YouTube channel, Mr. Mighty on YouTube, he's got tons and tons of stuff in there. Lots of excellent information. And he brings it up kind of tongue-in-cheek because he is a comedian. The cop walks up and goes, license, insurance, and registration. And Rob looks up at him and goes, apples, oranges, and bananas. Is that a question? What do you want? So, again, look at it really carefully. If they walk up and simply say those 3 words and you produce, you are agreeing that you understand, and I'm using understand in the legal sense, that you are obligated to provide those things. And because they're not saying, may I see your driver's license, right? They're not actually asking you a question. They're just going license, insurance, and registration. And okay, awesome. Great grammar, dude. It's not a question, right?
Yeah. But you assume that it is.
That's right. You're making an assumption at that point. And I can't stress enough. I keep saying this, and I know I'm sorry, but I have to. Assumptions will kill you. Do not act on assumptions. Please, whatever you do, do not act on an assumption. If you believe something to be an assumption, question it. Because chances are it'll fall apart. Judges, the 12 assumptions of court, right? When you walk into court, they assume that you're the fiction. They assume you're guilty, because otherwise why would you be there? They assume they have jurisdiction. They assume they have authority. And unless you question those things, they stand. And this is how the Western legal system works, is they make an assumption. If you don't question the assumption is considered truth. Now, if you make an assumption, if you assume you know what that officer, that lawyer, that judge is talking about, if you assume that you know what they're looking for, you're playing their game, and you will lose because they're very, very good at the game. So do not allow assumptions, and do not make assumptions. Question everything, and that should have been the name of the show, is question everything, because that's what it comes down to. What is the meaning of that word, and where do you derive its definition? One of the most powerful things to use in court, because they'll use Latin, they'll talk in odd languages, and they'll change the game in the middle of the in the middle of the sentence. They'll go from playing one game to another, and unless you question it, it stands. The police make assumptions constantly. And the first one is that you are acting in a commercial manner and you require a driver's license. There is so much information about this. And I'm considering, I don't know if I really want to do this because I've got kind of my hands full now, but I was considering putting up a Sentiomentium website where we can add the archives for everybody, because not everybody goes to RTS Earth for the archives, or my YouTube channel. And also, I could also put up a document library where I could put examples and locate some of these documents. But I got 3 other websites to deal with right now, and I'm looking for some more that are actually paying, because I got to make a living doing this. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. It would be nice if someone who had some experience would assist with this and assist with some of the research and getting documents and stuff up. But I don't know. We'll see. If it happens, it'll happen in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, there are an awful lot of websites out there that have a lot of the information that we're talking about. It might not all be in one place, but the information is out there, even to the extent, and funnily enough, the states are the best, United States are the best place for a lot of this in relation to drivers and vehicles, because the Supreme Courts and the state Supreme Courts of most, if not all, of the states in the US have all affirmed the right to travel.
That's right.
And the distinction between the right to travel and the privilege of driving. There's a distinction. And I don't know how many police officers realize that there is, because they're not taught that. They're taught a set of procedures and a law that applies to drivers, and they're not told that there's really a distinction. So they're automatically going for the driver. You, as an informed traveller, are more up-to-date on the law than they are, which is why it's a good thing to try and discuss it with them, if you can.
If you can.
If you can, yeah, because, again, it depends on their day and where they are, and listening to you, or just have a quota to fill and here, take this ticket, and if you don't, I'm going to smash your windows and drag you to the police station, and completely and utterly unlawful process, but that's what happens. Yeah, and again, the videos are out there, even from 80-year-old grandmothers being dragged out of cars and taken down to a police station. So, this particular process and these circumstances will vary every single time, but the process happens everywhere in life. We focus on the police because it's usually a bone of contention between people and police officers who overstep their authority and don't necessarily realize that they're doing it. But again, that same process works everywhere else, to the extent of school teachers, hospitals, land registry offices, anything to do with authority. There is a certain set of procedures and things that they want to follow, and there are certain things and forms that you must fill out. Courts are a prime example. Procedures go in courts. What a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't do it this way and you don't do it that way, it's not recognized by the court.
Yep.
So there are just so many different ways that they'll trap you and entrap you during this process.
Yeah, and that also brings us to the next little point of discussion here, and that is the direction of the interaction, whether you initiate it or whether they initiate it. And if you are seeking their services, then you're kind of stuck following their procedures. Now, if it's something that you have to have, or you believe you have to have, then you kind of have to follow their rules. But if they come to you and demand services, that's a complete game changer, because now you are in control. Because no one can demand your services without compensation. So you can demand a fee schedule, you can enforce a fee schedule, which is even more important. You can basically do things your way. You can sign your name how you wish it to be. And Carl's had this experience with a passport office. He went seeking a passport, and they refused to accept his signature, which, because he went to them, they can refuse it, and your options are either, okay, fine, I don't get a passport, or I got to follow your rules. If they seek you and they say, I'm not accepting this, then they're waiving their right to enforce whatever it is they're trying to pin on you or license you for or whatever, because that's the direction of the conflict. And so you have to you also have to look at the direction of the interaction as well.
I think, yeah, agreed to a large extent, but I think as well, because our signature, or let's make a distinction between autograph and signature. Autograph is a mark of a man or a woman. The signature is the mark of the fiction, the mark of the person.
Or agent.
Or agent, yeah. I mean, there's a list of names you can use for that, but the signature is very specific. And even in legal, even in the legislation, signatures are the mark, and it can be any mark. I should find it. I have a little leaflet thing, a little like a card that I can give out that relates to signatures and what it actually means. And one of the reasons why I was so forceful, if you like, with the passport office was because my signature is anything that I use to authenticate a document or a signing of that particular moment in time. And it's what I say it is. It's not what anybody else says it is. And this was what I was trying to establish with the passport office. It got to the point where they turned around and said, well, you signed the way we want or you don't get a passport. They literally said that in an email to me.
Yeah, which is
so my response,
it's entirely unlawful. And it's also entirely illegal, too.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's what I was going for. You either give me the passport the way I want it, or I'm going to have it in writing that you are being unlawful in your actions. And I've got it in writing. Does it make any difference when I'm handing a passport over with a signature not the way I want it? Probably not. But energetically, it meant a whole hell of a lot to me because I stood up for my process.
Yeah.
And I stood up to who I was as, the energetic being, not the slave, not the indentured servitude peon that they, certainly the elites up there perceive us to be. So, yeah, to me, there was a very big distinction in actually going through that process and pointing it out, but still being told in the end that their way or the highway. Now, as it turned out, I still reserved my rights on the form itself. It just wasn't in the signature field. And I've got copies of that original form, and I've also got the ability to say, well, present me if anything ever comes up, and I'm sure it never will, but if anything ever did come up, I could certainly say, well, let's have a look at the original application form, shall we? And we'll see whose rights I was reserving and whether you were acting under duress or giving me purpose to act under duress. So, yeah, I mean, it's a process, and they will fight you no matter what it is. And the next step, really, as far as interactions, John's already mentioned lawyers. Let's go something to something as simple as a phone call or a knock on the door. John, you've heard me mention these before, that these are also contractual arrangements and agreements too. Somebody knocks on your door, you have every right in the world to ignore it. You don't have to answer the door. Now, there are reasons of politeness and so on that have been instilled into us, that we automatically go to the door and open it to see who's on the other side. If you're not feeling particularly
congenial,
energetic, or even congenial, why would you even want to answer the door? If you don't want to be disturbed, go away. If it's important, you'll come back. If it's not, you'll go away and you'll never come back. Simple as that. Same with a telephone call. Fortunately, these days there's caller ID. The older days when a phone rang, you had a clue who was on the other end. So you either answered it to find out, or again, you didn't care and you didn't pick it up. But these days you've got caller ID, which typically tells you who is on the other side, and then you can make that decision whether you answer the call or not. But all of these are step one into a contract process. Now, for instance, if a lawyer or any authority either knocks on your door, sends you a letter, or calls you by telephone, your response when they introduce themselves and ask a question is key into what happens next. Because let's say a lawyer sends you a letter, for instance. Firstly, if it's unsolicited and you have no idea what this is all about, you don't even have to open it, and you can send that letter back. Addressee not recognized, return to sender. Now, if you believe that there is some form of an agreement or a contract or some process where there's pre-existing and they've sent you a letter, okay, then maybe you should open it because there's a pre-existing contract. But if this is completely unsolicited, you have the right to just send it back without even opening it. Now, unfortunately, what most people do is they throw it in the bin. They don't send it back. That in itself is an action.
It's an acceptance.
Tacit acceptance, because you didn't send it back, because you didn't deal with it. You accepted it, even though your acceptance was throwing it in the bin. So you've no idea what was in there, but they have no idea what you did with it. And the fact that you didn't do anything meant that you agreed in their view, their eyes, in the legal world. It's the assumption. So if you do receive something, it's unsolicited, send it back and write on it, addressee not recognized. And don't say addressee not known or all the other issues.
Yep.
The very reason that we use addressee not recognized is because recognized has a very specific legal definition. And by using that term, you are stating in no uncertain terms that you do not recognize, you do not see the person on the other side who is sending this, or corporation who is sending this letter. And of course, the next step is return to sender. I don't recognize you. I don't want to deal with you. Here's your shit back. That is your response.
Yep. You can also, because it is in many respects a contract, you can give them terms. If you need to respond to it, you can apply your own terms to the response. And because, again, unless you're slave and you're recognized as a slave, people can't demand your services without compensation. So, anytime where there's a contract involved, whether it's a letter from a lawyer, a summons, anything like that, put in your own terms. And then if they refuse the contract, the ball's in their court, and they can't say, well, he refused to do it. I didn't refuse to do it. They refused to do it. Here's my terms, here's my conditions. They're entirely lawful, they're entirely reasonable, and they refused. It's not my problem. There's.
Well, the first step would be to question as well.
Of course.
Yes, you could put your terms in, but the first step would be to question the language that they've used. Summons, well, we touched on this before. Summons is a prime example of it. The first thing is it's the name.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's part of the terms, right? who are you looking for? If you're
Yeah.
looking for a fiction, I have nothing to do with this fiction. I'm not the agent, owner, or surety to this fiction. And when you bring that up, now the ball's in their court to prove you are actually liable for the fiction, which they can't, because that would be entirely fraud.
That question alone could potentially just stop anything else without going into a list, because you're just adding more and more stuff for them to, and for you to trip up on as well, potentially.
Yep.
So make it simple each time. The simple, the better.
Yep.
Because
simple and
typically
honest.
what you do say,
simple and
what
honest.
you do say will get you in trouble.
Oh, big time. Simple, honest, straightforward, and reasonable. Those are you make sure that anytime you add conditions, anytime you make a claim, it is simple, honest, reasonable, and lawful. And that way, you have at that point the authority to say, look, well, they didn't accept my conditions, and there's nothing wrong with my conditions. They're not ridiculous. So clearly I don't need to do this, whatever it is, whether license or show up at the court or whatever. But again, it comes down to destroying the assumptions. And all of this, everything that we're talking about, it all comes down to destroying the assumptions. Because if they didn't have the assumptions, they couldn't act as they're doing now. And it's because nobody questions it. Well, I can't say nobody. Not enough people question it. Question the process, question the procedures, question the language. That's why they're getting away with this stuff.
Yeah.
So learn how to question.
Well, that's it. Learn how to question, but understand what's happening during that process. And I didn't cover the aspects of a telephone call. Typically, everybody will remember every single phone call. Well, not every single, but you can say any phone call that you've ever received. If it's from somebody that you don't know, it's an official thing. What's the first thing they say when they pick up? You answer the phone. That their question is that Mr. or Mrs. blah blah.
And my response is, do you not know who you're phoning?
Which is an easy way to answer it without actually answering it.
That's right. And it puts the onus on them to say, well, either no, I don't, or, well, this is the name I got out of the phone book. Also...
But the thing is, actually responding... actually responding in the positive to that is dangerous.
Yes. Because
you don't know who they're asking for. Is it the fiction, or is it the actual man, woman that they're asking for? And typically it's the fiction, so you don't want to have anything to do with it. But by saying automatically, as we usually do, yes, that's me, or speaking, that's the kind of responses that we give automatically. And in so doing, you've just sealed the contract. You've just you've supported their assumption. Yeah, you've done that too. Yeah, right. Because another option would be, well, yeah, one of them. Which one are you looking for? Right. Because how many? My given name, my common law name is John. My family name is Anderson. How many John Andersons are there in Canada? I mean, you look it up in the phone book, there's dozens, right? So which one are you looking for? Yeah. Which is a helpful way to go about doing this, right? It's not argumentative, it's not belligerent, it's not seeking conflict, it's seeking clarity. I want to make sure you're dealing with the right people. So who are you looking for? Which one? Again, another way to destroy an assumption, because they're just, they're looking for the John Anderson that lives in Markham, Ontario, and they phone me up and ask if I'm John Anderson. I go, yes, I am. And all of a sudden they're going to now assume I'm the one they're looking for, regardless of who it is, even though it's a totally different guy. And I'm going to have to answer for somebody else's bullshit. Or at least deal with somebody else's bullshit. So question it. I don't know how many ways I can say this.
learn how to recognize the assumptions, recognize the potential of the assumptions, and think about what you can do to get, to stick something in the way. Stick a question in the way that's not going to get anybody's hackles up, cause anybody, I shouldn't say cause anybody stress, because, yeah, you're going to cause them stress. But not in a way that they feel they're endangered or threatened in any way. Because that's the biggest way to get yourself smacked is if you come across as even remotely threatening, they're going to jump on you like you wouldn't believe. And also you're going to lose a lot of credibility if you do that too.
Yeah, because I'm going to stress this too. We want everybody to come from a place of responsibility and honor. Mm-hmm. This is not being dishonorable or deceitful or anything like that. As John pointed out earlier, it's if you've done something wrong, or if you've made an agreement or you've signed a contract, then realistically, you should look into honoring that contract, because as they say, ignorance of the law is no defense. Ignorance of the fact that you contracted isn't a defense, and that's how we get smacked down every single time, because we end up contracting for the simple reason we didn't know it was occurring.
Now,
we did, and didn't know to what extent.
As a caveat to that, if you agreed to the contract and you this is something you sought out, then yes, deal with the contract. If it's a contract that all of a sudden has changed, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that nobody said anything about, then most definitely question that contract, because it was deceptive to begin with. Okay, now if there's no deception in the contract, if you make a contract with a plumber, and he does his job, he does it well, everybody's happy, honor the contract. Don't try to get out of honorable agreements. A dishonorable agreement, now again, there's many degrees of this. In some cases, you're probably better off to say, look, that's entirely unlawful, it's entirely wrong, there was no meeting of the minds, there was no full disclosure, I am not liable for that contract. If it's something you sought, if it was a service you sought and you didn't make yourself aware of the details, then it's your own damn fault. So, yeah, honor is huge in this. You have to stay in honor. You have to stay responsible for your own actions. And that's the only way that we're going to move ahead on any of this is if people act honorably, if they deal with their own shit. So if you cause problems, fix them. If somebody else causes problems, fix those too. But make sure that when you do fix them, that you're doing so in a manner that educates, that lets these people know that there are ways to live that'll get around this. And in some cases, let them off the hook. Be on. Think of how would you like to be treated. If you cause someone harm and you walked up to them, look, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was going to hurt you, but it did, and what can I do to fix it? And they go, look, I really appreciate you coming. I really appreciate you taking responsibility for this. Don't worry about it. That makes you feel really good, right? And yeah. It's the same. It's the same going the other way. If you can resolve the situation so that the other party feels better about it, learns something from it, realizes there are honest, decent people on this planet, and not everybody is out to try to screw everybody else out of their money, we can really affect change. And that's what we're trying to do with these shows is teach people give them some tools so that they can affect a positive change in what we call our society under common law. Now, we're not talking about a legal society. A legal society is a named thing. It's a group of individuals gathered by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for a common goal, which kind of fits with, the lawful end of the society. But it's a very specific thing, and it has certain rules, and you got to follow the rules if you're part of the society, blah, blah, blah. It's all contracts. But general interaction. You want to build a house? Talk to the people around. You want to cut down a tree so that you have a better view. Make sure that the people around you don't really love the tree and it's going to hurt them and it's going to cause them issues. Think about your actions. Think about how you are going to interfere in their lives. Now, if that interference generates a positive outcome for them or they're not worried about it, if it's not a problem, if they're just nice people and they say, yeah, okay, I'll put up with that, no problem. Fine, awesome. But even when you're dealing with the police, even when you're dealing with the courts and the judges, yes, it's really easy to get belligerent. It's really easy to get upset and angry and seek revenge, seek retribution, seek to cause them problems. But that's not the point. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is simply make their process untenable, not hurt them as people. In some instances, you have to let them know as a flesh and blood human being, you're liable for your actions. And in some cases, you have to hold to that and make them liable for their actions. But it's not revenge. It's not retribution. It's for education purposes. What was his name?
Retraining society the way it should be, not the way it's been.
Exactly. One of the members,
the way it's gone over the years.
One of the World Freedmen Society members, I wish I could remember his name. I keep thinking George, but that's not it. He had a conflict with a police officer, and he made known that if you do this action, this is an unlawful action, this will trigger my fee schedule, you will be liable for it. The cop went, yeah, whatever, and did his thing anyway because he didn't believe that he had liability. So the member, after it was all done, the member created his bill, sent it in. The cop, from the story he told, the member told, after talking to the cop afterwards, the cop took the bill, took it to his supervisor, and went like, "What the hell is this? What's going on?" And they went to talk about the story, and it came out, and the supervisor finally came out and said, "Well, look, you did it. You contracted with him. You're liable for the bill." So a few days later, the cop shows up at the member's door with an envelope full of money, because it was $2,300 or something like that was the value of the bill. And what the member did at that point was to say, "Look, I don't want to take food from your children. The whole purpose of this is to get you to understand you are liable. Keep your money." And from that moment on, these guys are good friends, and they go to the bar together, and they drink and they talk and yak. And this officer is now well educated in the system and how the system works and where his liabilities lie, where the limits of his authorities lie. So do not discount the power of being nice. Please stay in honor.
It makes you friends.
That's right. Treat these people like people, and recognize they're confused. They've been trained a certain way, and they don't see the other side of it. So if you can gently draw them into the other side and have them question what they're doing, that's exactly what we want to see happen. Because it's only by educating the people who are causing the issues that we're going to fix this. And the only way we can get them to educate. Don't forget that when I mentioned
earlier, John, that the established training these days is us and them.
Yep,
that's the police officer's form of training.
It's military training.
You're automatically an enemy.
Yep, it's military
You're
training.
Not part of the community anymore. Yeah, it is.
Yep, it's military training. They're taught to shoot first and ask questions later, and basically, which is really sad. But in some instances, like in East Los Angeles, yeah, totally, I can see it. Like, there are places on this planet where it almost requires a military presence to keep control of that place. And I'm not talking control system control. I'm talking keeping people from killing one another. I mean, there are ridiculous places to live in this world, and where the rule of law and the true rule of law, the actual common law, just nobody cares about. Nobody even sees it, and life isn't worth anything. I mean, it's sad that this has to happen, and a lot of that is, I don't blame the people that are going through this so much, because the conditions that they have to live in are created. They're created by the controllers. They're created by the apathy of that group that's going through this, and because they've been taught nothing better. So in a lot of cases, I can have a tremendous amount of sympathy for these people, but also I have to look at, they do have some responsibility. They can look at their lives and go, look, I don't want to live like this. I want to have better. But unless a lot of people get to that point, it's like 1 against 1,000. And you could grow a really nice garden and fix your house and, put glass in your windows, have some decent furniture. And because you're 1 in 1,000, 500 people are going to come and take it away from you, just because that's where you live. But if it's the other way around, where it's one person that wants to take your stuff away because they're either too misguided or apathetic to go and do it for themselves, then you have the power of numbers, and they're probably not going to get away with it very long. And they will be taught some other way. I mean, I think we touched on this. I don't know if it was an after discussion or if it was one of the shows, but the difference between consequence and punishment. Punishment doesn't work.
Yeah.
Punishment is absolutely useless because you figure out how to get around it. Consequence, you don't get around. So, if we taught consequence, like they do in some of the tribes in Africa, they don't have issues. They don't have people stealing stuff. They don't have murders. They realize that's not going to help anybody. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to fix anything. The consequences are untenable at that point. And I know of one particular instance where a police officer realized the consequences of his actions. And this was in Alaska. I think I did tell this story on the show. He was being an absolute dick in this town. He got assigned to this town. He went in there, big, rough, gruff, total authoritarian bullshit control system. And the people in the town just said, look, pal, you can't do this. We're not going to put up with this. And nobody sold him fuel for his car. The grocery store refused him service. The restaurants wouldn't let him in. He couldn't be there. And that is the community enforcing the consequence of poor action. Now, on an individual basis, yes, you have the right to a fee schedule. You have the right to enforce your fee schedule. You have the right to bill for unlawful actions. Seek it as a consequence, not as punishment. And my fee schedule, if you read through it, some of the numbers are really, really high, but they're also for very serious things that don't have to happen. Now, it's pretty easy. If you go to a restaurant and you don't want the steak, all you want is a bowl of tomato soup, they can't really charge you for the steak, right? Of course. Of course. And so with my fee schedule, if they don't want to pay me the $1 million an hour, which is for physical harm, then simply don't cause me physical harm. It's very simple. Because there would be no need for it. I am not going to cause them physical harm. I'm going to simply ask questions. I am going to make them question what they're doing. And if they don't like it, don't talk to me. It's really, really simple. It's honest, it's honorable, it's lawful. And because I don't seek conflict, I don't look to cause problems for anyone. I look to solve problems for everybody I deal with. Little old lady on the street drops her groceries. I'll stop and pick them up for her. I'll help her. I'll carry them to her house. I'll take the time to make her life better. And that's the way I do things. And it's the same with the police officers. I will take the time to make their lives better as living beings, not as policy enforcement officers. If they're trying to enforce policy on me, they're going to get an earful because I'm not a person. I am not subject to corporate policy because I'm not a part of any corporation. I do not consent to being recognized as a person. I'm not the person. I didn't create that person. I'm not agent to it. I am not the surety to it. So if you want to charge a person, by all means, charge them. It has nothing to do with me. And if they...
which is a whole nother episode.
Well, it's another 6 episodes. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Oh, God, this can get so complex.
Well, let me just throw in a little light, a story. And I've told you this one before, I think, John, as well, back to how we can interact and how we should understand what it is that we're doing every single day. And this particular story is just simple. Telemarketer wanted to contract with me. They called me on the phone. And they'd called a couple of times. I mean, it was fairly insistent. And there was a couple of times I'd gotten on the phone. I actually said, no, sorry, I can't. I'm busy. I'm right in the middle of doing some remote access. I can't talk to you now. Other times I just ignored it. But this went on for so long. It was a good portion of nearly 2 weeks. So and eventually I had some time. So I answered the call. And she introduced herself, this woman, and she said, I'm from I think it was some government department that was doing some market research that to be able to gain all this information so that they could then, in fact, no, it wasn't. It was a private company, not government, so that they could actually obtain all of this information, the answers to these questions, and then they could then format the report to be able to sell it to the respective corporations, let's say. So she went through this little bit of an introduction and an explanation, and I listened to her. Maybe it took about 45 seconds for the whole thing. And the last part of it was, she said, would it be all right if I just spent 10 minutes with you and asked you these questions, and would that be okay? So I said, yeah, sure. Can I just ask your name and what your address is, please, so I can send you my invoice for the time that you're taking to ask all these questions, because I don't work for free. I don't give this information for free. And I'm not really being greedy, but you're taking up my time. And even though it might be 10 minutes, my minimum billing time is an hour. And just so you know, in advance, I charge $500 an hour. Is that okay with you? Now, she went ballistic on the phone, called me several choice names and being how greedy I was because I was demanding this amount of money just because she was calling and asking these questions. And I just listened to her go off, and towards the end, I said, okay, let me just point this out to you. You called me. You are asking me questions, a list of questions that are going to take up my time and that you're also going to use to be able to sell and make money from that process. Do you think that that is perfectly okay? Or do you think that I have the right to charge you for the time that you're taking and, in essence, for the answers that I'm giving to you? And she was silent for about 10 seconds, and then it went click.
Yep. Oh, it's
nothing else.
Some of these folks, it is a blast to screw with. Telemarketers, what is the word I'm looking for? guys who take polls.
All the pollsters.
Yeah. They just call up, oh, hi, can I ask you some questions? Sure. But first, before you start, give me your name and address and your employee number. I'll be invoicing you for this call. And it's hilarious, some of the responses you get, believe me. Those folks you can screw with. Be nice about it. Be reasonable, be honest, be honorable, and be lawful about it.
Well, it was simply pointing out exactly what she was bitching at me because I was quite rightfully asking for her permission to invoice her because she called me to waste my time to give answers that she was going to charge money for.
Yeah.
And she didn't realize that until I pointed it out. And then that's when, okay, I understand that now. Click. She had no further argument.
Yep.
But that's assumptions. That's the way this society's gone.
Yeah, it's a good way to practice. If you get the chance to do this, you get telemarketers or anything like that. It's a good way to practice dealing with sovereignty, dealing with your power, your actual lawful authority, and your rights to not be disturbed, your rights to be compensated for your time, for your efforts. It's fun. In a lot of cases, it's hilarious dealing with this. And there's actually a couple of videos. I know one TED Talk of a guy who just, because it's a blast, totally screwed with some telemarketers, and not to cause them issues, but to get them to think, wait a minute, what am I doing? And that's what this whole show is about. Is get to the point where you can use your processes to have the other party question their processes.
Mm-hmm.
And when
there's another one, John. Simply that when you go into, and you might have a different take on this, but you might go into the Services Ontario or some of the government services offices because you might want to redo your tag or reapply for the license, whatever it might be. And there are certain things where you have to make a signature. And, and I've gone in a few times and I've written my signature in a particular way and they've instant response. You can't sign like that. That's not on our records. Mm-hmm. So my response is, well, aren't you a public official or a public officer or whatever? And usually the response is yes. So I said, well, in that case, if you're a public official, you're not able to give legal advice. Was that legal advice you just gave me?
Yeah.
Stumped right at that point. I mean, there's just little things that you can do, point out, that just stops them in the tracks. But because we've got because most people at that response, what would you do? Oh shit, well, it's my signature, you've got to it. No, we don't. There's no argument to it. I mean, the other thing as well you could turn around and say is that I've been subject to fraud and I've had to change my my signature.
Yep.
Is there an argument to that?
Yep.
They really don't have an argument to that either, because fraud is one of those big ones, and you have a right to change what's required to authenticate a document. If fraud has been committed against you, then you have to pretty much change your signature, because if somebody's forging it, then, well, if you don't change it, then the fraud and the forgery continues.
Well, I mean, I can pretty much guarantee that it's being forged because it's being photocopied all over the place, and they're trying to apply those photocopied marks as the originals, and that is forgery.
Yep.
I mean, it's, people would think forgery is some guy sitting there with a pen and writing it every 300 times until it's perfect. That's certainly one way to do it, but forgery is also a photocopy. You're not liable for a photocopy. Although
Yeah, it's not your signature.
that's right. You did not make that mark, so that piece of paper cannot be held. You can't be liable for that piece of paper. That specific piece of paper. Again, be careful with your assumptions. And when they hold up a piece of paper, make sure that you know what's on it. And you are entitled to know what evidence they have against you. They are not entitled to know what defense you have. And a lot of people don't understand that, or recognize that, or even realize it's there. They have to give you you have a right to a defense. So unless they provide you with all the information, they're trespass. It's criminal trespass, and they're trespassing on your rights. Your rights are your property. And no one gives you rights. Okay, this is another thing. This is another show we're going to have to go into, and that is the core concepts of rights. What exactly they are, where you get them from, all of this stuff. And if you are given rights, you're a slave. Simple as that.
Technically speaking, you're given a privilege at that point, then, aren't you? That's
right. That's exactly it.
Yep.
And they just used the term, you have given rights. Now, the Miranda warning down in the States, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to attorney, blah, 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 blah. They're giving you rights, and they are limiting your rights to those that they're giving you. If you accept it, those are the only rights you have. This is in their eyes. Now, if you are going to accept that, then you accept it with something like, that's not all of my rights, but thank you for letting me know. Destroy their assumptions again. That's Now, if you have the right to remain silent, remain silent. Because that is an incredibly powerful tool. That puts all of the onus on them to prove their case. If you don't open your mouth, they really, most of the time, have nothing. And there's many stories about that. You get called into a tribunal, something simple, housing or the rentalsman or something like this. What they'll typically do is they'll get you to speak first, at which point you're screwed. If they get you to speak first, go, well, no, I'll let him go first. And typically it's over at that point because they most of the time, doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time they're getting you to speak first so that they have something to use against you because they don't have anything at that point. If you particularly in situations where you never saw it coming, that's most of the cases where this is going to be the occurrence. They're on a fishing trip, and as long as you don't give them anything to work with, they have nothing to work with, and you can really cause a major problem for them. So
agreed.
Learn who you are. Do not act on assumptions. Do not allow assumptions, and educate yourself. I want to go into more about this, but I'm just going to be repeating myself. So I'm going to take pity on the folks that are listening and not go into this any farther. If you need more information, there's a huge amount of information on the web. If we point out where to go, we're going to be directing your learning. If we just say, go look, you will direct your learning, and you're going to learn much more that way. You're going to learn stuff that's relevant to you, not relevant to us. So please don't ask us. It's
the center of your focus, really.
That's right. Please don't ask us, where to find the information. We will give you a very general answer because we do not want to direct your education. We want to give you some tools, some questions to go and seek out for yourself, because you will find information that we haven't. You will find information relevant to you specifically if you do it that way. So, please educate yourself. Please do your own research. Do not simply believe what we're telling you. Verify it. Go look it up. Go do your own research. Look at as many possible points of view. as many possible. Why can't I think today? Definitions as you can to get the broadest possible perspective. Okay, please. Now,
yeah, I think on that note, I think what we should do, because we want some people to get involved. So I think if anybody wants to, if you're okay with that, John, if anybody wants to, give a shout, come on and ask any questions or want to make any.
Well, Clive, at the beginning of the show, Clive mentioned that he wanted to bring some stuff up, and I was kind of, I wanted to give him a chance because first time caller, first time on the show, and we love questions. We love to be able to answer questions and give a perspective on stuff. So, Clive, if you want to come out, come on out. If you're there, I see your mic's still muted. You're welcome to. Oh, there we go.
I'm here.
Yeah, and just for everybody else, if you want to come on and ask a question anonymously, let us know in the chat, and we just won't use your name.
Okay, is my audio okay, John?
It's beautiful.
Okay, fine. Right. November the 27th, 2013, I received a communication through my letterbox, totally unannounced, and it was from an entity called Labour Force Survey. And it is a government survey. And on this communication, they had a reference number, and it just addressed me as family surname with my address, and it was all in uppercase. And in that communication, they use the following paragraph. Your participation is obligatory according to the Malta Statistics Authority Act 2000. In terms of Article 40 of the Malta Statistics Act 2000 and of Article 7D of the Data Protection Act 2001, it is declared that data collection or data collected by the National Statistics Office through this survey will be used internally for statistical compilation, analysis and dissemination only. And they wanted to speak to myself, any member of my family, age 15 and over, focusing on their employment status for the reference period in 1 week between October the 28th and 1st of December 2013. And it included questions regarding all persons living in the household, such as age, sex, marital status, etc. Now then, I had done a little bit of study on this, and I thought I would sort of break my duck, so to speak, and answer it with a conditional letter, a conditional acceptance, which I did. Before I say that, on the back of this notice, I received another little letter saying they would visit me at 12:15 on this particular date between 6 and 7. Okay? Now, this is my answer.
Clive, just before you do the answer, I just wanted to ask you a question. Would I be right in saying that questionnaire is similar to what most people in the UK and Canada and the States would name as a census?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Right. I haven't read you all of that because it's quite long.
Of course, yeah.
So, okay. This is my reply. I didn't use my name. I just used their reference on the header. October, December 2013 Labour Force Survey, your reference number, blah, 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 blah. And then underneath that I put, thank you for your offer to contract, which I willingly accept under the following terms and conditions. And then I went into a little preamble, which may have been wrong, but I put it anyway. The act to which you refer and threaten me with, which is probably wrong, but I did it anyway, within your notice only applies to the person defined in Black's Law Dictionary as corporation, a legal fiction, and enlegius, a creature of the law. a fictional entity known as the name written on the birth certificate, which is copyright of the City of London Corporation and the Vatican, which clearly states upon its face not to be used for identification purposes. Am I to understand that you are attempting to aid and abet me in committing fraud by acting in the public as this person? I went on to state, I am a living, breathing, flesh and blood man, not a piece of paper called a person. So your act does not apply to me. I am not a fictional entity, a piece of paper, but a real, live, breathing, flesh and blood man with a soul. All information has value. Otherwise, the Office of Labour Marketing Statistics Unit, and I have a trouble with statistics, by the way, would not be demanding to be informed of it, which is why I will not give my information or my finite time away for free, especially to a limited liability company, which all governments and all government agents are these days. The Government of Malta is listed on Dun & Blackstreet and is therefore, by definition, a limited liability corporation. And I did include the screen copy of that entry. Mm-hmm. Then I've got underneath that, in big bold letters, terms and conditions of acceptance, which states, whereas, should you insist that I commit fraud by using the capitalized name printed on the birth certificate in any communication with you or your office, then I shall insist that you issue me in writing, under full commercial liability and under penalty of perjury, a signed and properly witnessed statement of truth, taking full and all responsibility for the fraudulent use of the name, before I undertake to give you any of my time or any of my valuable information, valuable private information. Whereas, like you, I do not work for free. A man or woman is worthy of their labour. My fee for compliance will be €5,000 and a further €1,000 for every piece of private information that your survey requires. And there was 38 questions. If I receive any follow-up of this offer, by any means whatsoever, then I shall deem that my terms and conditions have been accepted and that you willingly accept your liability for the payment of €5,000 in advance of the interview, along with your statement of truth, accepting full liability for the use of the name. For your information, I have enclosed the following two documents. 1. I, who shall not be legal name, hereby proclaim to all with unclean hands, and that was 4 pages. And that was from a person I think you know quite well. Name is Kate. And the other one was from Pope Francis' apostolic letter of the 11th of July 2013, stripping away all immunities for all public offices, and that was 2 pages. I put, without prejudice, no assured value, no liability, errors and omissions accepted, all rights reserved, without recourse, none assumpted. And I didn't sign it with my name, I just signed under seal by a living, breathing soul and put my thumbprint in red on the paper and sent it back. And I was really scared stiff after sending it, wonder what the hell was going to happen. But anyway, in the end, they never contacted me. I heard nothing whatsoever. And that was in 2013. And that's my little story.
That's one of the best ones I've ever heard.
That was really, really well done. There was a couple of points that I wanted to bring up, though, because there was just a couple of paragraphs where you were actually making assumptions, such as the birth certificate, for instance, the fact that it is registered to the Vatican and the Crown.
Oh, it is.
It may well be true, but I don't know if we can prove that. And even if we could, I don't know that you had the evidence right there to be able to prove that. So making an assumption like that or making a statement could be detrimental and dangerous to you. But the rest of the stuff there that was putting them right in the place and explained exactly what the circumstances were, I think was spot on. I think it was really well done.
Yeah, it was absolutely beautiful, Clive. One of the best ones I've ever heard. And Carl is essentially correct when he's saying that, if you're going to make a statement, make sure you can back it up. In that particular instance, it's pretty unlikely they're going to question it because they don't even want to go down that road. They don't want anybody to know about any of this stuff. So if they were to question it, they have to bring out the truth. and they're not going to do that. But just be aware that if you do make a statement, make sure you can back it up.
Right. Thanks, John. Thanks, Carl.
No problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful process, Clive. And folks, that's exactly how you do it.
Thank you.
It's simple. It's straightforward. It's not argumentative. It's not seeking conflict. It's simply an honorable thing. You want my time? My time is valuable. This is what it's going to cost you. And adding the motu proprio, which removes the immunity, corporate immunities from the individuals, that's probably what actually sealed the deal.
If they understood, because that particular document on its face, I don't think is easy for people to understand that that's what it's saying.
It's pretty clear. That first time I read it, I saw immediately what it was. And
Yeah, I thought it was too.
Yeah, I don't know that well, it's been, once it was published, and certain sites that did publish it, they actually made reference to what it was saying. So I think if you just got this in the mail, such as these guys did, I'm not sure if they could necessarily understand it. But anyway, that's it's kind of a by the by. It's certainly another tool that really, really worked and gave it power, I'm sure. But again, you have to be aware that anything that you're going to provide has to mean something on its face to them, because these people don't know a lot of it. They don't know. Further up the line, they may well do. So again, don't make the statements or unless you can back it up. And if you're going to provide any kind of evidence, really make sure that it's going to stand up, it's going to say what you want it and need it to say, and it's in their face obvious to do that. Not that they have to go to, high-end legal firm to figure it out.
yeah. And just as a point of advice on these documents, take your time writing them. Take your time with the language, take your time with the sentence structure, with how you want to bring out these ideas. Don't just scribble something on a piece of paper and send it in. Write it down, sleep on it.
Took me 2
back.
days.
Yeah, write it down, sleep on it, come back, read it over and over and over again until it's got to be perfect. It's got to be exactly what you want to say, and it's got to be said in such a way that it can't be misinterpreted. Very few people are taught how to write anymore. Even myself, I'm coming up on mid-50s, and I remember in school, they never really taught me how to write, but I was quite an avid reader. So I gleaned from my reading, especially stuff that was, several orders of magnitude over what everybody else was reading at the time. Because I was into science and ecology and the little more meaty subjects. I learned how to write. I learned how to formulate a sentence so that it had one meaning and one meaning only. And this is, especially when you're dealing with legal representatives, that is really, really important, because their job is to obfuscate. Their whole, every lawyer is taught to make sure that he creates as much confusion as possible. And especially when they're trying to get away with...
And then they turn into politicians.
Yeah, and then they turn into politicians. So, the better your document is written, the clearer your sentences, the more concise your sentences. Usually the better. In some cases, 7 or 8 pages is awesome. It's going to work really good. In other cases, 7 or 8 pages is going to cause problems. You only need one. And typically, look at it from the person who's going to get it. Okay. In an instance like this, it's going to be just some clerk, and they're going to open this up and go, "What the hell is this?" Because they've never seen anything like this before. So they're going to give it to their supervisor, and it's going to go up the chain. If it's going immediately up the chain, you need to write it a little bit differently, because you're working specifically with that individual. and not the office of the individual. You're working with the individual. So it would be Joe Blow acting as Minister of Defense or Minister of Highways or whatever. What Clive did, because they didn't address it to anybody specifically, he sent it back with very non-specific language. But stating, they had the number, they knew what address that was going to, and after reading it, they went, I'm not dealing with this address. Because they know. These guys, the frontline troops, I feel sorry for most of those folks because they really haven't got a clue. But higher up the chain, they know exactly what's going on. And when you give them a document like that, which has so much power in it, they will not deal with you. And they may test you a couple of 3-4 times, but if you stick with your guns, if you stay in honor, you stay being reasonable, they will stop. And we've seen that over and over and over again. As long as you're careful with your language, you're careful with the words you use, you don't incriminate yourself, they will go away eventually. So there is ways out. Yeah. This is an awesome example of something like that. And especially if they initiate it, like the letter, they'll write the letter in, when you get this note, they write it in such a manner as to intimidate. You must do this. You are obligated to do this. This is, and all of this sort of stuff. But the operative word there was, this is an act. Okay? It's not a law. It's a statute. The statutes are corporate policy. They only apply to corporate employees. Unless you're an employee, doesn't matter. You're not subject to it. And that's why he could do this. If it was like you dug a hole and you broke a water main, then, well, yeah, you did it. The physical person did it. Now physical being did it. They're going to try to apply it to the person because they want the corporate protections that they think are there. So you're going to be charged by the corporation. So they have to charge the fiction, even though you're the one that caused the problem. But simply because you caused the problem, deal with the problem. Okay? You can deal with it under common law, outside of the fiction, with the actual living flesh beings who you need to deal with, but outside of their office. And then if they want to bring it into the office, that's fine. If you dig a hole and break a water main or pull up a power cable, fix it, deal with it, because you caused the problem. Now that gets kind of fuzzy. There's a lot of, it would be difficult in situations like that where there is harm, there is loss, there is damage, but they are the people who you cause the harm, loss, or damage to are obligated to deal with the fiction. Yes, you can simply tell them to bugger off because you're charging a fiction. I'm not a fiction. Go away. But that's not an honorable way to deal with that because you did cause the problem. So your process is going to have to be adjusted. And I don't know. That particular instance, I'd have to think about it for a week to come up with a viable solution and a good route to go that wouldn't get you in even deeper problems than you're in now. But I'm sure there's a way around that. The point is, if you cause a problem, fix it. If they cause a problem, accept it with conditions.
Yeah. So, yeah, good one, Clive. So, I don't know, is anybody else who wants to come in and ask a question or relate circumstances that they may have been involved with in the past?
Thanks for the critique, guys.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for coming on and sharing your experience. Well, it looks like we lost a bunch of our audience, and doesn't look like we have a whole lot of questions coming in. I know Vivek he had something he was talking about earlier. He may not want to come out and talk about it. It's kind of late for him. It's a little too late for him. But I'll get him to put it in, to write it down, write a story down, and we'll just relate it later. And But it's a good story. Basically, he had a friend of his is a lawyer in Singapore, and he had a nice little chat with the lawyer, and he, in a very general sense, pretty much confirmed all of the stuff that we're talking about. So if you do get a chance, if you can find say an old lawyer or an old cop who's disillusioned and isn't in the system anymore, make friends with them, because it's gold mine. You'll probably get tons and tons of information and some really good things to work with, especially ones that got out because they didn't like what was going on. And sorry about the noise. They're power washing next door. So actually, it's pretty good timing. We're just about done. So I guess we'll wrap up and get ready for next week.
Yeah, I think, I appreciate everybody listening. I'm glad you're here. I hope it's of some use to you all. We enjoy doing it. We really want you guys to get some benefit from it, because the more people that know about this and the quicker it spreads, the better it will be, because the aim of this is to try and change society, to be in honour, to be self-responsible, but not to accept the assumptions and the bullshit that's being poured on us from people who assume they have authority when really they don't. The first prime statement is we are all equal, and that's under the law and under legal, really. We are all equal. We just have to stand in that and make sure that other people and authorities and corporations and the like stand it too, and that we can do such things as I did on the telephone and make conditional acceptances. You don't work for free. You don't do anything for free. So anyway, I appreciate again everybody listening. Clive, great evidence there of your process, and John, again, appreciate your input as I do every week.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. You guys all have a great week, and enjoy your research, because it's a hell of a rabbit hole, and there's all kinds of things laying around on the floor down there.
Sure is.
You'll find some stuff that'll just absolutely blow your mind when you start digging into it, and lots of tools, lots of things you can use. And also lots of things that make it seem like you have no power. But don't let that discourage you, because they're trying to get you to stop doing your research. Keep doing your research. You will find the remedy. And on that note, we'll say goodnight and have a great week, folks. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah,
good night, guys. See you next week.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everybody.